Hello, and welcome to the Wade Borth Podcast. I'm your host, Wade Borth, and in every episode, my goal is to get you to think differently about how money works and ultimately to empower you to take control of your money and your personal financing system. Welcome back to the Wade Borth Podcast. Today, I'm going to address a couple of issues, or maybe just one underlying thought process about whole life insurance. There's a lot of people out there in the financial world, just water cooler talk, that love to have an opinion, a thought process about whole life insurance, which again, I'm always a big believer that, nobody's wrong. Everybody has an opinion. But so today I'm going to share with you my opinion about whole life insurance and just really address some of the common misconceptions about how people think about it and why. Really the question of why do they think that way? So a lot of people think they come with this idea that whole life insurance is, has a low rate of return, it's expensive to own, and it's the worst investment of all time. And I hear these quite often, and a lot of times I wonder why they're saying that. And I'm like, what have they heard? What have they seen to lead them to that conversation? And I know just from my experience and being in the industry a while, quite a while, maybe even if you look at my gray hair, but the idea is, why is that? And so let's talk about these just a little bit, and let's think about why we're hearing that. And so I know people say, "Oh, my advisor said, whole life is not a good idea." And I don't ever ascribe motives or how people think and what's in their heart. I always try to think back as what have they been taught, or what is the conversation they're hearing that they're repeating? Because that's typically how we learn: is we hear something, or we have an experience with something, and that's how we form our opinion. So this idea that, it's got a low rate of return, it's expensive to own, it's the worst investment of all time, typically comes out of somebody's opinion, somebody's experience that maybe isn't your experience, maybe isn't what you're trying to achieve, isn't aligned with what your goals and what your beliefs are. And so I would just ask you to always ask that question: how does this serve me? Because whole life is just like anything else in life. It's a tool. It's not right or wrong. It's not a fix-all. It's not the devil. It's just a tool. And really the benefit from it is how do we use it and what is our expectation of that tool. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then, from the standpoint of why there's so much noise around this. And I really don't believe there's as much noise as we think, but it's just one of those things that I wanted to bring up and have a conversation about because I've heard it a couple times. I work with a lot of brand new agents that are hearing this. So, and I just want everybody that listens to this podcast to kind of go, "Oh, I see where you're coming with that." So just know that I'm not saying it's it's the devil. I'm not saying it's the cure-all for everything. But when it's used properly and it's used for the right purpose and it's aligned with your values and gives you the benefits that you want and you deserve, that's where the truth about whole life comes into play. So let's take these and let's just, kind of go down the common objections, right? It's got a low rate of return. And this is really an interesting, we have a whole educational series just on this idea of rate of return and its yield that it gets from a whole life. I had a gentleman, there's actually a book behind me from Daniel Pink that says "To Sell is Human." It really just talks about how are we providing information. And this idea that it's a low rate of return, he would bring up the conversation of compared to what? It's got a low rate of return compared to what? Do I compare my whole life policies and how they, what yield they're getting or how they're growing year over year to real estate? No, because it's not real estate. Do I compare it to the stock market? No, quite frankly, I'm glad I don't compare it to the stock market. And it depends on when you listen to this, but lately we've been going through a lot of turmoil in the stock market. And I can tell you right now that it's got a great rate of return compared to what's going on in the stock market. But I don't want to compare it to that. Why? Well, it goes back down to probably the third question: is the worst investment of all time. The whole point is that it's not an investment. It's not designed to be an investment. It is more has more characteristics of a savings plan and a savings program. So we have to make sure that we're not comparing dogs to elephants. There's just not a fair comparison. They both deal with money, they're both animals, but they're not a fair comparison. So let's look at the characteristics of your whole life compared to characteristics of your savings vehicles. Where you're saving your dollars, how much you're saving. That's probably a better conversation than it's the worst investment of all time, because it's not an investment. So either I have to agree with that statement. It's kind of funny. I either have to agree with that statement or totally disagree with it. I'm not sure exactly how to approach it. Because it's not an investment, I can't say it's the worst investment or it's a great investment, because it's neither one. So just know that it's not an investment. It is more akin to a savings vehicle. And so when we start looking at the rate of return or the yield inside of a whole life over its lifetime, it's phenomenal. And what we have to do is we have to make sure we're comparing apples to apples. And what I mean by that is I can take a high yield savings account right now that's getting, I think I saw something, came across my email the other day, that we can get almost 4% in a high yield savings account. Now, the problem with that is that it's all over the place. Today it could be 4%, depending on what's going on in the marketplace, and interest rates from the Fed, a lot of external pressures. It could be 5, it could be 2. Where was that 2-3 years ago? Think about that for a second. So it's the inconsistency more than the rate that is concerning me. What is the clarity that you're looking for in your savings? Do you want long-term consistent growth, or do you want a whipsaw where it's 5% one year and 0.5% the next year, where you can't plan on anything? And so therefore, and I really believe this is true, this is why people don't save as much as they should be saving. Savings and liquidity and cash on hand is a tremendous tool. It keeps us out of a lot of trouble. It keeps us out of feeling financial pressure. Think about that for a second. Why do people have financial pressure? Because they feel, how many times have you heard this? I feel asset rich, cash poor. And when I need cash, I can't turn those assets into cash quick enough to either take advantage of an opportunity or stay out of trouble. That's financial pressure. So again, it really has a lot less to do with savings. Again, we need to save more, and it has to more to do with what is our savings environment. And that's why we love whole life insurance. I love the idea of whole life insurance because it's safe, it's guaranteed, it's predictable. It brings me certainty from that asset that it is. It's not an investment asset. It is more of a savings asset. So when I think about it from the standpoint of what it is from a low rate of return, I'd argue that all day long. I think it's a low rate of return. Now, I would say it's got a great rate of return for what it is and what it serves, because again, if I have a high yield savings account, we have no predictability behind it. And the other side of the equation is we have to pay taxes on it immediately. And we have to pay taxes on it. So, and if there's any fees associated with it. So the net yield on a whole life policy is great. And you can do a lot of calculations, and depends on what your tax bracket is and what your yield is on your savings account. But if you have a yield on a savings account, you'd have to get probably close to 6% over a long period of time each and every year to equal, not to do better than just the rate of return inside of your policy. And that's not talking all the other 7 benefits that are on top of rate of return. So you're just getting one benefit, or maybe you're getting 2 with the savings account. You're getting some safety and liquidity and maybe a bit of yield. So you get 3 out of the 8, where the life insurance policy, if we look at it for what it is, you're getting 8 benefits and yield just being one of those. Whereas savings account, you're only getting possibly 3 benefits. So I think it's important to look at it not just in the vacuum of just yield. I think it can actually stand up and probably do better than most quote unquote savings account if we understand that's what we should compare it against. But when we take a look at them from a macro level, there's not a better place to store your cash than inside your whole life insurance policy. So hopefully that's helpful. We have a number of videos. We have content that can help you understand that at a deeper level. If you want to listen to that, I would just say reach out to me. Send an email to wade@sagewealthstrategy.com saying I want to know more about how it compares as far as a rate of return. Because if you think about it, this is the common versus uncommon conversation. And I would say that from the standpoint of individuals, the common thought process is all these, right? Low rate of return, expensive to own. When we look at uncommon, who's the uncommon? Who's doing something different than you're doing? Are banks doing something different than you're doing? I would suggest that they are. So, people of wealth, they love whole life insurance. They love storing a bunch of money there. A lot of times it's the tax benefits that they love. But then once they have it for a lot of other reasons. We have some very successful real estate investors that love it for the use of, it's the proper sequence of where they hold their money. Everything that you have has to flow through savings, right? Money comes in. We'll do a podcast about this later as well, but it's the flow of money and it's the right sequence. And what I mean by that is we have to have savings before we can really do anything else. You should really have savings before you buy wealth acceleration or investment type of products. Because if you don't, then you're going to feel a lot of financial pressure. So with that being said, we can go through that. And again, if you want more content, we'll be doing more podcasts on this, or you can reach out to me, Wade@sagewealthstrategy.com. or book an appointment with me, and we can get you some additional content to talk deeper about this and show you how the mindset of what I call what are the wealthy doing? What are the Rockefellers of this world doing type of thing. So, because again, this is the common versus the uncommon conversation. The idea that's expensive to own. I look at that and I'm like, what does that mean? Expensive means that you don't understand the value that you're getting. And once we can kind of take a step back and really understand the value, then we have to ask the question, is it expensive to own? And just a really simple explanation of this was years ago, probably 15 years ago, I was in downtown Minneapolis. And we were out enjoying the evening, the nightlife with some friends, and I got separated from them, and they went one way and I went another. I'm like, shoot, I need to get back to my hotel room. But this is before Uber, right? So please, anybody that doesn't understand before Uber, just bear with me for a second. I was downtown. I'm like, oh, there's a cash machine. I can get some cash and I can get a taxi. So it was probably about a $15 taxi ride back to my hotel room. So I go to the cash machine, and the cash machine for $20 exchange wanted, $3. So that's a 15% charge on my money. Was that expensive? In a vacuum, I might say yes. But did I find value in that immediately? You better believe it. I'm like, I got $20. I was super happy. I'm getting back to my hotel room, and I was super happy. Would I pay it again? In those circumstances, it was tremendous value to me. So was it expensive? Absolutely not. So when we say it's expensive, let's put it in context to what value are we getting from it. If we have to understand the value, and again, that's why we go into what are the 8 benefits of whole life. If you understand all 8 benefits and you get all those with the same dollar, then the point is it valuable? Does it bring value to your life? Does it align with what you're trying to do? If the answer is yes, then it's not expensive. If it doesn't align with what you want to do, then maybe it is expensive. So let's not just cast that dispersion that, it's expensive because we've been told that around the water cooler, or because somebody on the financial entertainer network says it is expensive. Let's do some of our own critical thinking and think, how does it bring value to me? And if it brings value, then it's not expensive. So hopefully that's helpful, that it makes sense. And again, the idea of, is it the worst investment of all time? All I would say, no, because whole life is not an investment. If you hear me say nothing else in this podcast, just learn that whole life is not an investment. So I would have you just reach out to me if you'd like to have more of a conversation, because obviously there's some curiosity around this, because typically if people are talking about it one way or the other, there's curiosity. And there's either people that are curious about something, wanting to know more, or curious about it in order to defend their own position. So they're looking for a bias to defend their own position, or they're like, I've heard it said that whole life is the worst investment of all time, versus making a definitive statement where there's no room for growth or expansion of your thought process. But if you're curious about why are people saying, why are the wealthy, why are the uncommon in this country using whole life as a tremendous financial tool? Well, let's have a discussion. Let's talk about that. Reach out to me. Hop on my website, sagewealthstrategy.com, because I love to have this conversation. This is what I live and breathe. And we have a whole series. We have a thoughtful process that we take people through to see if what we talk about in the education we bring is in alignment with what you're trying to achieve. Talk to you soon. If you're enjoying this podcast, or know anyone else that might be interested, please be sure to hit the subscribe button, and please leave a review. This will help this podcast reach and help more people by ranking higher in searches, and ultimately help more people get out of financial bondage. And don't be afraid to share this podcast with your friends and family, as we can be easily found on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.